Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at three people who are really kind of changing the world today. Elon Musk, Malala Yousafzai, and Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how much impact just one person can have.
It really is, and they're all doing it in such different ways, too. Like, we've got everything from space exploration and technology to education advocacy and climate activism.
I think that's what makes it so interesting. It shows that change can come from anywhere. You don't have to fit a certain mold.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's start with Elon Musk. I mean, this is a guy who basically taught himself how to program when he was 12.
I think he was even younger than that.
Right. And now he's, what, like a real-life Tony Stark?
Yeah, I mean, leading Tesla and SpaceX alone would be a pretty impressive career for most people.
Yeah, I mean, forget about all the other stuff he's doing. So with Tesla, I think what's interesting is it's not just that they're making electric cars.
Yeah, it's how they really kind of like disrupted the entire auto industry.
Yeah, exactly. Like before Tesla, electric vehicles were seen as kind of like, I don't know, clunky and boring and just not very cool.
Exactly.
And suddenly it was like, oh, wait, electric cars can be cool.
Yeah.
They can be fast, they can be stylish. And I think that shift in consumer perception is huge.
Absolutely, it's huge.
Yeah.
And then you've got SpaceX, which is, I mean, their goal is to revolutionize space travel with reusable rockets.
I know. It's crazy.
It's not just about launching satellites anymore. They're literally aiming to colonize Mars.
And he has that great quote. It's like, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor.
Yeah, I love that quote.
And it really kind of sums up his whole approach.
It does. It does. It's that willingness to take on these huge challenges,
Yeah.
even if they seem impossible, that really sets them apart.
Right. And like we were saying before, it's not even just about space. He's involved with Neuralink, which is developing brain-computer interfaces.
Oh, yeah. And the Boring Company to solve traffic congestion. Like, he's tackling all these huge, huge problems facing humanity.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to Malala Yousafzai.
Okay.
I mean, her story is just so incredible. Like the resilience, the power of one voice. I mean, imagine being a young girl in a place where girls' education is really under threat, and you have the courage to speak up about it.
And not just speak, I mean, she was blogging for the BBC when she was 11 years old.
I know.
Like, just shining a light on what was happening.
Exactly.
That's incredible bravery, especially under Taliban rule.
And then in 2012, she was shot by the Taliban just for advocating for girls' education.
And the fact that she survived it all,
Yeah,
it's a miracle.
it is. And then what she did after that, it's almost even more incredible.
Right, like using her platform to become this global symbol of the fight for education.
Yeah.
I mean, wow.
And she didn't stop there. She wrote that book, I Am Malala. She became the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner ever. And she founded the Malala Fund, which supports education initiatives all over the world.
It really shows you that one person can make a difference.
She's got that really famous quote, "One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world." And it just makes you think about, like, yeah, maybe we all have the potential to create change too.
Yeah, it's so inspiring. It's not just about like individual empowerment. The Malala Fund's actually working with governments and communities to change policies that prevent girls from accessing education.
So it's about creating lasting change. It's not just a temporary fix.
Yeah, that's really important.
So, okay, now let's move on to Greta Thunberg,
Right.
who at a very young age has become kind of like the face of the global climate movement.
Yeah, the face of the movement, yeah. What's amazing is that focus she has. I mean,
Yeah.
being diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, she sees that as a superpower because it allows her to hone in on climate change.
And she's not afraid to hold people accountable either. Like,
Yeah.
remember back in 2018, she was 15 years old when she started skipping school to protest outside the Swedish parliament
Yeah.
and demanding action on climate change. And that one act sparked the Fridays for Future movement.
Yeah, I mean, millions of students all around the world joining her in these climate strikes.
I know, it's incredible. And she really brought this sense of urgency to the climate crisis, especially with her speeches, like that one she gave at the UN in 2019.
Oh yeah, that was powerful.
And can you believe she was only 16 years old when she gave that speech? And she was so blunt, like challenging these world leaders directly. Remember that, how dare you lie?
Oh yeah, it was powerful. And it made people pay attention, that's for sure.
Yeah, she doesn't shy away from the science, and she's really resonated with young people who are just frustrated with the lack of action from older generations. It's like she's saying, listen to the science and let's do something about it now.
Exactly.
Now, I know she's a polarizing figure, but you can't deny her impact. I mean, she's made climate change a mainstream issue and inspired a whole generation to fight for their future. And that quote, "You are never too small to make a difference" has become like a rallying cry.
Yeah. It's interesting how she's really changed the conversation around climate change. It's less about politics and more about, intergenerational justice. Like, young people are demanding a future that is safe and sustainable.
Yeah. So we have these three incredible people all making waves in completely different ways. But what do they have in common? Well, I think they're all taking on these massive challenges and demanding change.
Right. And what's fascinating is that they all do it so differently, but they all have this incredible vision and unwavering commitment to their cause.
Yeah, it's like they see a problem and refuse to accept the status quo. They're willing to challenge everything, push the boundaries, and inspire others to join them.
It's really pretty amazing.
Okay, so we've talked about the backgrounds of Elon Musk, Malala Yousafzai, and Greta Thunberg, but now I kind of want to get into what makes them so captivating. Like, what is it about them that really draws people in?
Yeah, it's like they've each kind of tapped into something that resonates with us,
Yeah.
whether it's that desire for progress or justice or a healthier planet.
Right, so let's go back to Elon Musk for a second. We were talking about all these ambitious projects he's involved in, but it's not just the technology itself.
No. It's the way he presents it,
Like how?
He's a master storyteller. I mean, think about it. He's not just talking about electric cars. He's talking about a future where we're free from fossil fuels.
Right.
And he's not just launching rockets. He's painting this picture of humanity becoming a multiplanetary species.
Yeah. He's making these really complex concepts seem exciting. Almost like something out of a science fiction novel.
Exactly, and that's key. He's selling a vision, a future that people want to be a part of.
But some people say he overpromises and underdelivers.
Yeah, that's a fair critique.
Mhm.
I mean, there have been missed deadlines, and, there is some skepticism about, whether some of his goals are even possible.
Like colonizing Mars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even if he doesn't always hit the mark, I mean, he's pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible.
Yeah. Okay, let's switch gears to Malala. For me, what's so powerful about her story is how she really embodies that idea that education can change the world.
It's such a powerful reminder that knowledge is power, and especially for girls. When you educate a girl, you're not just empowering her, you're empowering her whole family, her community, potentially her country.
Yeah, it's like this ripple effect.
Exactly. And Malala's not just advocating for any kind of education, she's really emphasizing quality education, the kind that teaches girls critical thinking skills, that empowers them to become leaders.
And her message has really resonated globally. I mean, she's a symbol of hope, even in places where girls' education is still really restricted.
I think it's fascinating how she's been able to bridge these cultural divides. She's not preaching, She's just sharing her story, her experiences, and I think that makes her so relatable.
Right, it's that vulnerability and
Yeah.
that authenticity that really make her so compelling.
Absolutely. And it's important to note that the Malala Fund is actually working to change policies and systems that prevent girls from getting an education. So it's not just about individual stories. It's about addressing the root causes of inequality.
Right. Okay, now let's talk about Greta. What really stands out to me is how she's become this voice for her generation,
Yeah.
expressing the anxieties that so many young people feel about climate change.
Yeah, she's given a voice to that sense of urgency, that feeling that time is running out and that the adults aren't doing enough.
Right.
She's not afraid to call out world leaders and hold them accountable for their inaction.
And she's backing up her words with action, too. Like, remember those school strikes she started?
Yeah.
Those turned into this global movement, inspiring millions of students to demand climate action.
Yeah. It's really remarkable how she shifted the conversation around climate change. It's no longer just this environmental issue, it's a social justice issue, a human rights issue.
It's about the future of humanity.
Exactly.
And she's made it clear that young people aren't just going to stand by and watch their future be destroyed.
Yeah, and she's done all of this while facing incredible criticism and scrutiny. I mean, attacks on her age, her diagnosis, her methods, but she hasn't backed down.
It's really remarkable.
It is. It's a reminder that even when you're facing adversity, you can't give up on what you believe in.
Right. So, okay, we've talked about their individual impacts, but what can we learn from these three game changers collectively? Like, what's the big takeaway?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just the power of belief. They all have this unshakable belief in their cause, this sense of purpose that drives them forward.
Yeah.
And they're not afraid to challenge the status quo. I mean, they're disruptors. They're pushing us to rethink how we do things.
And they're also incredibly authentic. Like,
Yeah.
they're not trying to be anyone. They're not. They're just being themselves. And I think that really resonates with people.
Yeah. They're masters of communication, too. They each have their own style, whether it's Elon Musk's bold pronouncements or Malala's personal stories or Greta's, stark warnings. But they've all found ways to really connect with their audiences.
Yeah, and they've all used technology and social media to amplify their message and build global movements. It's amazing how they've been able to harness the tools of our time to create change in the real world.
Right. Now, I want to circle back to a question we kind of posed earlier. What can we learn from these figures? How can we take their inspiration and put it into action in our own lives?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by the scale of these challenges. Like, what can one person do?
Yeah. But it's important to remember that change doesn't always have to be on this massive scale. It can start small, in our own communities, in our workplaces.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Well, think about Elon Musk.
Uh-huh.
We can learn from his willingness to innovate, to think big, to not be afraid to push boundaries. Maybe it's not launching a rocket to Mars, but maybe it's finding a creative solution to a problem at work or in your neighborhood.
Right.
And from Malala, we can learn the power of speaking up for what you believe in, even when it's uncomfortable. Maybe it's advocating for a cause you care about, supporting a local organization, or even just having those tough conversations with friends and family about the issues that matter.
Yeah.
And from Greta, I think we can learn the importance of taking action, even if it feels small. Maybe it's making more sustainable choices in your daily life, reducing your carbon footprint, joining a local climate action group.
Yeah, those are all really great starting points. But I think there's an even bigger lesson here, and that's the idea that we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Exactly. We're not passive observers.
Yeah.
We are active participants.
Yeah.
And by choosing to engage, by choosing to make a difference, however we really can contribute to building a better world.
It's a really powerful message. It's easy to feel helpless, right, in the face of all these big challenges, but their stories show us that we're not powerless. We can make a difference.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Don't just be inspired by these people. Be challenged by them. Let their stories push you to think critically about the world around you and to find your own way to make a positive impact.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about the incredible things that Elon Musk, Malala Yousafzai, and Greta Thunberg have accomplished.
Okay.
But I think it's also important to acknowledge that even with the best intentions, there can be downsides to consider.
Right, yeah. Like with anything, there's always another side to the coin. And I think in this case, it's about recognizing that even though their approaches are groundbreaking, they're not without, potential drawbacks.
So let's start with Elon Musk. He's all about pushing those technological boundaries, but do you ever think that his focus on these big futuristic solutions might sometimes overshadow other important ways to solve problems?
Yeah, some people would argue that the resources that go into things like space exploration or even, hyperloop technology, maybe those could be used for more immediate needs here on Earth. Like, alleviating poverty or improving access to healthcare, things like that.
Right. And even with his emphasis on sustainable tech, like electric cars, there's the question of who can actually access that technology. Like a Tesla is still a pretty luxury vehicle.
Yeah, it's not something that everyone can afford.
Exactly. And that kind of raises questions about whether his vision of progress is really inclusive. Is it a future that everyone benefits from or just a select few?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then there's the issue of regulation, right? Musk is known for pushing the limits, sometimes moving faster than regulations can keep up.
Right. And that can lead to some concerns about safety and, unintended consequences.
Like with Neuralink, for example.
Exactly. The idea of brain-computer interfaces is amazing, but you have to ask, what are the ethical implications? What happens if something goes wrong? Who's in control of this technology? Those are questions that we really need to grapple with as this technology develops.
Okay, so let's switch gears to Malala. Her work advocating for girls' education is, it's just amazing, but do you think there's a risk that her global platform might overshadow the work of local activists and organizations that are already doing work on the ground in different communities?
Yeah, that's a possibility. Sometimes international attention and funding can get focused on a single person, and that might take away from those grassroots efforts that are really embedded in their communities.
And it's important to remember that the reasons why girls don't have access to education are really complex and vary from place to place. So there's no one solution that will work everywhere.
Absolutely. While Malala's story is incredibly inspiring, I think we have to recognize that just focusing on individual empowerment might not address those systemic issues like poverty or conflict, or even those ingrained cultural norms that are really preventing girls from going to school.
Right. Okay, now let's talk about Greta. I mean, she's ignited a global movement, but some people say that her style, while it's effective at getting attention, can also be a little too confrontational.
Yeah, I think her bluntness and that direct style really resonate with a lot of people, especially young people who are just frustrated by the lack of action on climate change. But sometimes it can alienate people who might otherwise be open to, dialogue and collaboration.
And there's also the concern about burnout, right? I mean, she was so young when she was thrust into the global spotlight, and she's been carrying the weight of this movement for years now.
Yeah, it really highlights how important it is to support young activists and make sure they have the resources and the support systems they need to deal with that pressure.
Right. So, after looking at all of these different perspectives, how do we reconcile these figures' incredible contributions with those potential downsides? I mean, are they heroes or villains? Or is it somewhere in between?
I think it's rarely that black and white. I mean, they're complex people working within really complex systems. They're driven by, amazing goals. But their approaches, like anything else, have limitations and potential drawbacks.
So it's really up to us to engage critically with their work, to celebrate their successes, to acknowledge their shortcomings, and to keep having these important conversations about the challenges that we're facing as a global community.
Absolutely. I think we need to move beyond that, hero worship thing and recognize that even the most well-intentioned people can make mistakes and, maybe have blind spots or they overlook things.
So this whole deep dive has really highlighted the importance of thinking critically, asking those tough questions, and looking at things from multiple perspectives.
Yeah, it's not about tearing these individuals down. It's about having a thoughtful discussion about their impact and how we can all work together to create a better future.
And their stories really remind us that change is a process, and it's rarely simple or easy.
It takes constant dialogue and collaboration, being open to learning from our mistakes and recognizing that there's always more to learn.
And we need to be mindful of those unintended consequences, prioritize inclusivity and equity, and just consider everyone's well-being.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, these individuals are pushing us to think deeply about some of the most crucial questions that humanity is facing. And they're challenging us to reimagine what's possible.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. Don't just be inspired by these individuals, be challenged by them. Question their assumptions, engage with their critics, and let their stories kind of ignite your own critical thinking and action.
Because the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something that we create. And by engaging in these thoughtful conversations, considering different points of view, and taking action, we can all contribute to building a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. So that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and keep those brains buzzing.